To begin at the beginning, what was the kind of family life you had when you were young? This was before the Second World War. What kind of work did your father do? What was your intellectual influences as a child?
My father was an experimental physicist in the physics department of the University of Minnesota. And my mother had been, until I was born, a high school teacher. Mm-hmm. She had had a PhD or in the classics.
She did, yes.
And my father, I realized, thinking back, really took pains to help educate me in matters of science. I remember he once explained to me how a lock works, how a ship can go uphill, so to speak.
Right.
And another time, he explained that how one could, if one were on a high bridge or something, one could tell how high one was by dropping something and timing the.
Did he have a curious child?
Well, I certainly, he probably was good at choosing his moments, but I certainly was interested in such things. He didn't, I never felt forced or anything.
You never felt forced. That's actually quite important, because we often these days hear about academically pushed children and so forth. You would not call yourself that?
Not at all. And
what were the kinds of things? Were you the kind of child that fixed things or wanted to know how things operated? Was it mechanical interest or abstract interest, even at that young age?
Well, in the basement, I had a workbench that I could, and I don't remember the details of how much it was my work and how much, but I made a pushmobile or something with 4 wheels. And later on in high school, I had some interest in chemistry and had a chemistry set and played around with that a bit.
You're certainly, as a future mathematician, blessed with parents who were intellectually challenging.
Certainly.
Were you also blessed as a student in high school with interesting teachers at this level who helped shape your thinking?
Well, I had some reasonably good teachers. Probably the best, actually, was a history teacher. He later became headmaster of the school. It was a private school. When I graduated from elementary school, which meant I finished the 6th grade, my parents wanted to send me to a private school. And I said, no way. All my friends are going to Marshall High, the local junior high. But after 2 years at Marshall, I asked my parents, what was that about a private school?
Oh, so you yourself felt you weren't getting what you needed.
It was a terrible school.
Terrible school.
Really.
So there you were in the better school. What was the name of the private school you went to?
St. Paul, not St. Paul's Academy.
St. Paul Academy.
We lived in the Twin Cities. We were right near the border, and we weren't in the better part of town, which across where the corresponding school in Minneapolis was.
Understood.
Near the university, which is near the border. And so I went across the border to St. Paul.
Already, by the time one finishes high school, you begin to be asked to make decisions about future. So how are you at this point deciding where to go to university, and what are you speculating that your interest will be in university?
Well, uh, they had something, what were they called? Something like college entrance exams, and I took them. I knew I don't really remember too well, but anyway, I applied to Harvard and was fortunate enough to be accepted. I even had Conant had instituted a thing where every year 2 students from each state got scholarships to Harvard. And I was one of the 2 from Minnesota. But the scholarship depended on your family's means. So my parents could afford.
So it was more honor than money.
Indeed, but it was very psychologically very helpful to me to realize, well, I didn't need my parents.
Right, right.
If they hadn't been able to send me easily, I would have been able to go anyway.
To understand the beginning of a community that you're interested in, that encourages you, that advances your interest in science or math. Are you finding that at Harvard? Are you finding mentorship? Are you finding yourself as a young scientist?
Well, so I thought I was a hot shot, so I took advanced courses, more advanced than was advisable. But no, it was during the time of World War II.
Very important, yes.
So many of the Harvard regular professors, had gone to do war work in some way. And but I certainly got a lot of very excellent.
It must have been an intellectually exciting time. But again, the decisions you're making at your time, because you're going to begin to start achieving things very soon. So were you able to finish Harvard despite the war?
I was, because even after I was in the Navy and sent to MIT to learn about the weather, the MIT course at Harvard was very generous in giving credit for courses that one had done or things one had done in connection with the war.
So it was interrupted, but later on you got credit for what you did during the war.
Oh yeah, and I'm called Class of 46 because I entered in 42. That's how they decided. So many people had their college career had been interrupted by World War II in various ways that they decided on that method of assigning you to a class.
I've already had the opportunity to talk to some people, future mathematicians or computer specialists, who said actually what they did in the Second World War, your generation of course, actually directed some of their future interests and work. Would you say the same? What you were doing in World War II had any influence on your later thinking?
Not really.
Not really.
Not really. It was somehow it should have been clear to me that I've told this story before, that I should do mathematics. But I had read this book by E.T. Bell called Men of Mathematics. Very sexist title,
but for the time, typical.
And it was, and of course, realistic. But anyway, I had read the book, and it's about 20 chapters or so, each one about one of the great mathematicians of all time. I mean, Archimedes, Gauss, Galois.
Probably even Abel.
Oh, yes, of course. Good point, yes. And I knew I wasn't like those guys.
So this was the opposite of inspirational.
In a way, yeah, true. Uh, then anyway, I decided to major in physics. No, actually, I wanted to, but then that required a lot of labs, and it was more convenient to major in math. So I think I did major in math. But I went to graduate school after serving for a year. I went to graduate school in physics.
In physics. So why did the world lose a potential physicist and gain a mathematician? At what point are you now thinking, well, maybe I'm not incapable of mathematics?
Uh, as a veteran,
Yes.
I had the government, the GI Bill of Rights included the privilege of, if you got a professor to sign a little thing saying that would be useful in your career or in your learning, the government would buy a book for you, whatever book you requested. So I realized after the first term of graduate school that I'd got about 20 math books and very few, if any, physics books. I mean, some sort of both, a combination mathematical physics, but all of them with a strong. So that was an indication.
Where you really wanted to go.
Right, and where I think also where my abilities were.
And which graduate school are you in at this point?
Well, I went to graduate school in Princeton, yeah.
I see.
And
And that's where you're doing the switch, where you're deciding, no, I'm gonna be a mathematician.
that's right. In the middle of the spring term, I went to see at the time, the chairman of the department there was Solomon Lefschetz. And I said I would like to change from physics to, he was chairman of the math department. I'd like to go to the math department.
Right, you needed his permission, of course.
And he said, what's going on? You're the second or third one that wants to do this. And I said, yeah, he said, do you think the qualifying exam is easier in math than in physics? Is that why? I said, no. Anyway, he said, put your name in the hopper. This was just before they were going to decide on the applicants for the next year. Put your name with everybody else and we'll see.
I'm really as somebody who is not a mathematician and will never be one, I'm wondering how an older figure knows that somebody has the wherewithal to be a mathematician. Was there at some point a series of questions asked of you? Problems presented to you to solve? How do they know, yes, this is a life in mathematics that is shaping?
Well, so I just, after I talked with Lefschetz, I decided I should maybe audit some math courses. And I went, it's an unusual choice of subject, but I went to a course that Emil Artin was teaching in measure theory. Mm-hmm. Very unusual thing for him to do. I think he wanted to learn himself some connection with his own work. And one day, soon after I'd started attending the course, at the end of the lecture, he stated a theorem and said he had no time to prove it, and we should think about it before then, see what we could do before the next lecture. I went home and just thought, and the night before the next meeting of the class, I saw how to do it. He said, did anybody find a proof of this? And I raised my hand timidly, and he said, come to the board. And I started, and as soon as I was not, at that time, skilled at presenting my ideas at all. It was the first time I ever had been asked to do it in that way. And as soon as he saw that I had the idea, he took over and explained. So, but that, and it certainly took care of the problem of whether I could become a math student in Princeton.
And maybe even make good contributions one day. Well, you're now welcomed into the mathematics community of students of mathematics in your graduate school. Have you found a mentor in Anton? Was that his name?
Arjun, yes.
Did he seek you out as a student?
No, I don't remember exactly how it worked, but I guess well, his main claim to fame, or at least one of them, was his proof of the general reciprocity law. And as a high schooler, when I read this book by E.T. Bell, then in mathematics, I learned about the quadratic reciprocity law. And it really fascinated me. Mm. And here it was Artin who had, I remember how I first met Artin was we were sitting in the common room, and there was a group of graduates. I was sitting in the common room, and there was a group of graduate students around Artin, and I asked somebody, who was that? And they said, that's Artin. And I said, who's Artin? And then I learned later, or perhaps then, that he was one of the real, so to speak, authors of the textbook Moderna Algebra, Modern Algebra, which had been, the author was van der Waarden, but it was, if you turn to the inside, you could learn that book was based on lectures by Emil Artin and Emmy Noether.
How early mathematical insight and genius can come. What do you think about youth and mathematics?
Well, the best mathematics is done when certainly I would say from 25 to 35 years.
This is characteristic.
This is quite characteristic, I think. I mean, of course, very, very gifted people can keep going for quite a while, but I think still, most of the time, their best work is done early.
You once used a wonderful word that I read to describe young mathematicians, and you said there is an advantage to their being naive. What do you mean by naive?
Well, not having prejudices, not just having not formed definite ideas, but being more open to new ideas.
Well, what were you as a young man at this point between 25 and 35? You're maybe, in your mid-20s at this point?
Well, I got my degree at the age of 25.
You got your degree, your PhD.
Yeah.
Did that PhD already register your future contribution in mathematics? What was its, if I can understand it, its central insight or question?
Well, essentially I had been given a very interesting exercise to do by Artin. Was to use the then modern notion of Adel and use the Adels to prove the functional equation of zeta functions and L functions of algebraic number fields, which had the equivalent thing had been done by Hecke in the late teens. He had proved this functional equation, but to do it with the Adels, things made it much easier. And so it was just a big, beautiful exercise. And if I did anything new, it was sort of in the local part. We have the notion in number theory of local and global problems.
And this was a local...
This was global, but the fact that I also did the local and did it more logically, basing the global on the local, rather than historically it had been done kind of the other way. And
I can understand that, yes.
Anyway, it was a great exercise, and I think I did a good job on it. And that was my PhD.
When, again, from the outside, but also the inside of mathematics, people often talk about deciding to be involved in pure mathematics as opposed to applied mathematics, although whether there's an absolute difference or not is worth discussing. But did you consciously say, my talent and interest is going to be in pure mathematics, I'm not going to worry about specific application issues?
Absolutely. I couldn't care less about the applications. I was interested in number theory, and it's in some way, well, I don't know, it's not the purest, but it's it certainly has, well, at that time, had no applications. Little did I know that thanks to the advent of high-speed computing, some of the things I did would become useful in cryptology and secret ways to communicate.
Has to be of some satisfaction, but it wasn't your intention.
Certainly was not my intention.
I'm going to ask another general question about you as a practicing mathematician, and the whole question of how you convey information, because at one point I know you have confessed to not being an easy writer, or somebody who immediately, if you will, dashed from the idea to the paper, sent it out into the world. Tell me a little bit about that communication and that community of mathematicians, and why a lot of your ideas got conveyed anyway, even though if you were not rushing to publish.
Well, a formal publication, sort of, I don't know, I perhaps worried too much about making the writing beautiful and the style and so on, whereas I could write a letter much more easily. So I wrote many letters, and that was especially to my friend Jean-Pierre Serre in Paris, and somehow that, in some indirect way, that was a way of publishing.
Because the ideas got passed on.
They got passed on, and the letters themselves, I suppose, got passed on. But, and I didn't have to worry about proofreading.
So how do we get you from the doctoral success at Princeton to Harvard? Back to Harvard, really, because you had been an
I've
undergraduate
been an
there.
undergraduate. Well, I spent a year at Columbia.
Ah.
I don't remember exactly. Well, Chevrolet, who had been in the U.S. During World War II at Institute for Advanced Study and gave some courses in Princeton, but then he had a job at Columbia for a year or two before he got an offer from Paris. He called back to Paris, and he sort of probably came rather late, but he dropped everything and went to Paris. So Columbia needed somebody. Thought they did, and they offered me a position. And when I was sort of ready to go finally leave Princeton, and so I accepted that, and I'm very happy for many things. I had a year in New York City, and I met Bernie Dwork, who became a very good friend. And
But you only lasted a year.
well, I got an offer from Harvard and thought I decided to accept it.
Well, we've gotten you to Harvard. What are you going to do there? How long are you going to be at Harvard,
I
essentially?
was at Harvard for 35 years.
Okay. Again, in the mathematical community, if I can understand some of it, what are the principal challenges that you are presenting yourself or posing to yourself? Are you staying in mostly in numbers theory at Harvard?
Yes, and sort of what they call arithmetic geometry, or
Right?
well, yes, I stayed all my life. I'm not terribly broad at all.
More and more, there are opportunities for young people to gather together. An example that we're very interested in is the Heidelberg Laureates
Oh yeah.
session where they can meet people. What do you think about that process? You've been there,
Yes,
and do you enjoy that interaction, or is it a gap of generations that doesn't lead very? What do you think about these encounters between the you and the young?
well, I think we're too old. Maybe if you had the young with people in their 30s or something, it might be better.
Ah,
Uh, maybe I mean, I'm very old. In the two session Heidelberg forums that I've attended, but I don't think my presence there has been terribly useful to the young. I talked with them, many of them.
you'd be surprised how much seeing how a life went before in terms of the profession can move them.
Well, this is probably a good idea, what you're doing now.